I've never liked surprises, but that evening I made an exception. Emma had been working late for weeks, claiming a new project deadline kept everyone in the office until nightfall. I thought I'd surprise her, show up at her office, maybe grab dinner together, remind ourselves that we still existed outside emails and reports. The plan sounded simple. I left work earlier than usual, stopped by the florist near the station, bought a bouquet of her favorite white tulips, and drove downtown through the drizzle. The city looked softer under the rain. The sidewalks washed clean, streetlights reflecting like trembling ribbons across the wet asphalt. When I parked in front of her building, the sky was already folding into evening. I waited by the glass doors, watching silhouettes move behind them, suits, coats, tired faces rushing toward weekend freedom. I checked my watch. 7:46 p.m. She should have been done by now. I almost texted her, but something in me wanted the moment to stay unplanned. I wanted to see her before she saw me, to catch her natural smile after a long day, not the one she put on for photographs and meetings. The elevator bell chimed, and a pair stepped out, a man and a woman. I recognized her posture before her face. Emma, my wife. She was laughing quietly at something, her voice low, warm, familiar, yet touched with a tone I hadn't heard in a while, effortless and light. The man beside her wore a dark tailored suit, the kind that fit too well to be off the rack. His hand rested casually near her back, not touching, but close enough to suggest familiarity. He said something, and she tilted her head slightly toward him, a motion that looked rehearsed by time. Then I noticed it, the way he helped her with her coat. Not the polite gesture of a coworker, not rushed or awkward, but practiced, almost tender. Their fingers brushed for a second too long, and she didn't flinch. Her eyes met his as if finishing a sentence without words. And then, for the first time, she looked past him, straight at me. Her expression froze mid-smile. A second later, she regained composure too quickly. She said something to him, then walked toward me with that professional poise she used when defusing situations. She kissed my cheek, brief, perfunctory, and introduced the man as Daniel, a colleague from the new division. He smiled politely, shaking my hand with that confident ease of someone who doesn't consider himself out of place. I smiled back, because instinct told me not to break the scene. We talked for less than a minute, something about deadlines, traffic, the weather. When she said they had just finished preparing a report, Daniel nodded as if confirming her story, and then he walked away toward the parking lot. She watched him go for a second longer than necessary. I saw it, the delayed glance, the faint trace of a private rhythm between them. When she turned back to me, her eyes had already changed tone. Lighter, almost amused. On the drive home, she filled the silence with small talk. How cold it had gotten, how her manager might extend the project, how she was craving Thai food. I listened, nodding when required. The tulips lay on her lap, their petals trembling slightly with every turn. Once, at a red light, she reached for my hand. Not affectionately, but as if sealing a gap in a story. Her fingers felt cold. When we reached home, I went straight to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of wine. She slipped off her heels, stretched, and started explaining, casually, precisely, as though anticipating every question before I asked it. She said Daniel had only been helping her with her coat because the floor near the door was wet. Someone had spilled coffee earlier, and she nearly slipped. That was all. She said it with such practiced sincerity that for a brief moment, I almost believed her. But belief isn't a switch. It's erosion. It fades quietly. I stood there, watching her move around the kitchen, opening the fridge, checking her phone, humming an old tune she hadn't sung in months. Every gesture looked normal, yet slightly wrong, like a photograph that had been retouched too much. Later that night, I lay in bed beside her. She was already asleep, her breathing even and distant. I stared at the ceiling, the streetlight outside drawing a pale stripe across the wall. I thought about how trust never breaks loudly. Cracks and whispers, in the flick of an eye, the pause before a word, the way someone says you're imagining things just a little too calmly. That image of her and Daniel replayed in my head. the soft lighting of the lobby, his hand brushing her sleeve, her half-smile. The details became heavier the more I examined them. I tried to reason with myself that maybe I was reading too much into nothing, that people could simply be kind, that fatigue and distance were twisting perception. But deep down, under every rational layer, something raw had already shifted. In the morning, she was bright again, cheerful, almost overly so. She made coffee, packed her laptop, and kissed me goodbye with unusual enthusiasm. I watched her car pull away and noticed for the first time how easy it was for her to leave. No backward glance, no wave, just a clean departure. The rest of the day blurred into mechanical motions. Meetings, calls, errands. But underneath, a quiet loop played. The scene at the office door, the coat, the shared glance. It wasn't the act itself, it was the familiarity. That small, invisible asterisk Macy people can't fake. By evening, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. The tulips she'd left in the vase had started to droop. Their stems bent under their own weight, soft and tired. I thought about the way she had explained everything, the precision of her calm. That's when I realized something irreversible had begun. Not an argument, not a betrayal, but a fracture. The kind that grows in silence until one day, it becomes the shape of your life. And though nothing had been proven, I knew this. When I saw them together, something in her eyes told a truth words never would. A quiet confession hidden behind a practiced smile. That night I didn't confront her. I didn't even ask. I simply memorized the details. The time, the rain, the smell of tulips, the sound of her laugh, like evidence. I went to bed beside her again, the distance between us invisible but vast. I turned off the light, and for the first time the darkness didn't feel like rest. Felt like waiting. After that evening, everything ordinary became suspect. I began noticing details I had once filtered out, moments that used to mean nothing but now carried a faint distortion. Emma had always been busy, but suddenly her schedule felt choreographed. Meetings stacked at strange hours, new project calls that always seemed to fall on weekends, unexpected overnight stays that she brushed off as team deadlines. I had spent years trusting her completely. Now I was cataloging her words like evidence. It started with the small absences. On Saturday mornings, she used to make pancakes and hum to the radio, hair unbrushed, sleepy smile hidden behind her mug. Lately, she'd beg and leaving early, saying she had to stop by the office. The first time, I didn't question it. The second time, I asked what project required her on a Saturday. She smiled vaguely and said something about client deliverables, then kissed my cheek and left before I could respond. Her perfume lingered longer than usual, sharper, bolder, not the subtle floral one she used to wear. When she returned in the afternoons, she was always freshly showered, her hair styled differently, her phone tucked deep in her bag. Once, while sorting laundry, I noticed a faint scent of cologne on her scarf. Not mine, heavier and musky. I told myself it could have been from a coworker, from the air in a crowded elevator. Still, I washed the scarf twice. The smell stayed. A few days later, I found her laptop open on the counter, but as I walked closer, the screen dimmed and locked. She'd changed the password. I asked about it that evening, pretending to sound casual, and she said her company had implemented new security protocols. I accepted the explanation, but the phrase itself felt like a shield, convenient, rehearsed. I didn't realize how deeply it unsettled me until I caught myself memorizing her typing rhythm at night, wondering if I could guess the code. She also began using a new phone, same model, different number. She said the old one had stopped syncing with her work apps. Whenever it buzzed, she'd tilt it slightly away from me before reading the screen. The notifications appeared blank, just the word, message. When I asked who was texting, she would smile, say clients, and change the subject. Then came the ring. She stopped wearing it one morning, claiming it was being cleaned. Weeks passed. Every time I asked, she gave a new reason. The jeweler had delayed it, or she'd forgotten to pick it up. Eventually I stopped asking, but I never stopped noticing her bare finger when she left the house. Even her routines changed. She started running before dawn, though she had always been the kind who hated mornings. I once offered to join her, and she said she preferred solitude. It helped her clear her head. When I asked where she ran, she mentioned the old park near the river. But one morning, when I drove by that route on my way to work, she wasn't there. Instead, her car was parked several blocks away, near a quiet residential street I'd never seen her visit before. Doubt became a presence in the house, invisible but constant. I could feel it between us at dinner, in the pauses between her words, in the faint delay before she answered a question. Sometimes she'd catch me studying her face and ask if something was wrong. I'd shake my head, forcing a smile, pretending to be tired. But I was only tired of pretending. Once, late at night, I stepped onto the balcony for air and saw her already there, speaking softly on the phone. Her voice had that calm, deliberate tone she used in business meetings, but the words didn't match the cadence of professionalism. She ended the call abruptly when she noticed me and said she was talking to a client in another time zone. Her hands trembled slightly as she slipped the phone into her pocket. I tried to ignore the faint echo of laughter I'd heard just before she hung up. Not hers, not mine. The next morning I checked her car. The odometer showed an extra 97 miles since Thursday. Her office was only 12 miles away. When I mentioned it, she laughed and said she'd taken a wrong exit after a meeting. I nodded, but the explanation slid through me like smoke. Shapeless, unconvincing. Even our shared digital traces began disappearing. Events vanished from our shared calendar. Her tagged photos on social media were fewer, cropped tighter, often from behind or in groups where she blended into the crowd. When I once commented that she didn't post as much anymore, she shrugged and said she was done oversharing. Yet, on her desk, I once caught a glimpse of a printed photo tucked into her planner. Her and a man at a conference, standing close, both smiling at something off camera. The picture was small, trimmed at the edges, as if someone had cut out a third person. At night, I'd watch her sleep and wonder if she was dreaming of someone else. Sometimes she'd turn away from me, mumbling in her sleep, a faint smile curving her lips. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how love decays. Not through grand betrayals, but through hundreds of small, ordinary lies. Still, I hadn't confronted her. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that wouldn't let her twist reality into reason. Because Emma had a way of making everything sound reasonable. She could turn guilt into logic, silence into misunderstanding. She had always been brilliant at shaping perception, in meetings, in friendships, even in marriage. I started keeping mental notes. The perfume, the cologne, the mileage, the missing ring, the late calls. Each detail alone meant nothing, but together, they formed a pattern too symmetrical to ignore. I realized that suspicion isn't just doubt. It's a kind of awakening. You begin to see not what's new, but what's been there all along. Some nights, I'd replay our early years, dinners on the balcony, shared jokes about burnt pasta, the quiet warmth of knowing someone entirely. That feeling was gone now, replaced by vigilance. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her observer. And though there were still no photos, no messages, no confession, I no longer needed them to feel what I already knew. The certainty wasn't loud or violent. It was steady, clinical, undeniable. The truth had a weight of its own. By the time she kissed me goodbye on Monday, the shadow between us had become permanent. It followed her to the door, lingered after the sound of her car faded. And as I stood there, holding the empty coffee cup she'd left behind, I realized something simple and devastating. Once trust starts dying, everything ordinary becomes evidence. The moment of truth never arrives dramatically. It doesn't knock on the door or shout your name. It slips in quietly, like an afterthought, disguised as something ordinary. For me, it came on a Friday evening, the kind of evening when everything feels slightly out of rhythm, when the city hums with the promise of other people's plans. Emma had said she was going out with colleagues for a company night out. She even showed me the email invite on her phone, the logo, the subject line, the time. Everything looked legitimate. Maybe it was. But the voice in my head that had been whispering for weeks wouldn't rest. I told her to have fun. She smiled, relieved, kissed my cheek, and left. Her perfume lingered in the hallway, the same one I didn't recognize. I watched her car disappear down the street and waited for the silence to settle. Then I went to my desk drawer, took out the small tracker I'd bought online 2 weeks earlier, and opened the app on my phone. The signal blinked steady, moving through the city, following the familiar route to downtown. For the first 30 minutes, I tried to distract myself. I turned on the TV, poured a drink, checked emails. But my eyes kept drifting back to the blinking dot. It finally stopped at a location marked Lumen, a high-end restaurant I knew too well. It was the same place where I had once taken her for our anniversary. That detail stung. I grabbed my keys and left. The drive felt longer than it was. Every red light stretched time. I parked across the street, the rain starting again, thin and steady. Through the restaurant's large glass windows, I saw them. Not a crowd of colleagues, not a group dinner, but just 2 people at a corner table. Emma sat with the man from her office, Daniel. Even from across the street, I could read the familiarity in their posture. She was leaning forward, smiling, her hand resting on the table, too close to his. A bottle of red wine stood between them, only one glass, hers. Daniel's plate was untouched. He seemed more interested in her than the food. When the waiter brought dessert, Daniel said something that made her laugh, and she touched his wrist lightly, almost unconsciously. It wasn't the gesture itself that shattered me. It was how natural it looked. Then came the moment that froze everything. He reached under the table, his hand finding her knee. Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she looked at him, that slow, knowing look I had seen once before in the office lobby, and smiled. I didn't move. I just stood there under the rain, the noise of the city folding into silence. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was stillness, a cold, absolute kind of understanding. They stayed for another half hour. I watched them leave the restaurant, walk together to the parking lot. He opened the door for her, and she laughed again, brushing her hair back. When they drove off, I followed at a distance, though I already knew it was pointless. The tracker confirmed what my eyes had already witnessed. They stopped near a hotel downtown. Not the corporate type with bright logos, but a quiet boutique one tucked between old brick buildings. The car idled for a few minutes before she stepped out. Daniel followed, his hand grazing her back as they entered the lobby. The door closed, and that was it. I didn't go inside. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted certainty, and now I had it, ugly, undeniable certainty. Proof wasn't meant to be gathered anymore. It had been delivered, scene by scene, as if the universe itself wanted me to watch. I sat in my car for an hour. The rain turned heavier, tracing small rivers across the windshield. The bouquet of tulips from that earlier evening came back to mind. How they had withered, bent under their own weight, silent and inevitable. That was what marriage felt like now. Something beautiful once, now collapsing quietly under the pressure of neglect. When I finally drove home, it was past midnight. The house greeted me with stillness. Every object looked different, colder, sharper. Her mug on the counter, her jacket on the chair, the faint scent of her shampoo in the air. I walked through each room as if collecting memories before they expired. In the bedroom, I opened her closet. Her clothes were perfectly arranged, the order of someone who liked control. I noticed a small envelope tucked into the side pocket of her purse. Inside was a hotel keycard, the same logo I'd just seen downtown. My hands didn't shake. They didn't need to. The truth had already settled into me, calm and precise. I placed the card back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat at the edge of the bed and waited. The digital clock glowed 2:14 a.m. She came home at 3:07. I heard her keys first, then her soft steps. She entered the bedroom quietly, thinking I was asleep. I kept my breathing steady. The mattress dipped as she slid beside me. Her hair smelled faintly of his cologne, the one from the scarf, the one that didn't belong here. She whispered something, maybe an apology meant for someone else, and fell asleep almost instantly. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The light from the street flickered across her face. She looked peaceful, even innocent. But innocence was no longer part of our life. At dawn, I got up, showered, dressed, and drove to the park where she used to run. The path was empty, the air cool and damp. I sat on a bench and watched the sun climb over the trees. I wasn't thinking about confrontation or revenge. Not yet. I was thinking about how betrayal doesn't destroy you in one blow. It dissolves you slowly, like salt in water, until you realize you've become transparent even to yourself. When I returned home, she was gone again. Early meeting, she'd said in a note on the counter. I read it once, folded it, and placed it under a glass. Then I walked to my office, opened a blank document, and typed 3 words. It's over now. They didn't feel like an ending. They felt like a beginning. Cold, quiet, and deliberate. The morning after I wrote those 3 words, the world looked unervingly normal. The same pale light crept through the blinds, the same sound of distant traffic, the same faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Yet everything had changed. The illusion had cracked, and beneath it was silence. Pure, heavy, almost comforting. Emma texted around 10. Meeting running long. Don't wait for me for lunch. I stared at the message for a while, then archived it without replying. I realized I didn't need to confront her anymore. She had already confessed through her actions. What came next wasn't about anger, it was about control. I spent the rest of the morning in my office, going through files, bank accounts, and shared documents. Years of marriage had intertwined our lives not just emotionally but financially, legally, practically. I had built systems she never fully understood, and now those same systems would be my defense. I started a list, methodically, like an accountant balancing a final ledger. First, finances. I logged into the joint accounts and initiated freezes on transfers beyond a certain threshold. Not an immediate lock, just quiet limits, invisible until she tried to move something substantial. Then I checked my own portfolio, investments, savings, small real estate holdings I'd acquired before our marriage. They were still mine. I confirmed ownerships, verified records, exported backups to an encrypted drive, and hid it in my desk drawer. Second, business access. Emma had always used my old credentials for a few shared tools connected to our side projects. I revoked them silently. No explanations. No visible trace until she'd try to log in. I wanted the realization to arrive like cold water. Sudden, confusing, irreversible. Third, belongings. I took 3 empty boxes from the garage and began to sort. One for essentials, her clothes, her books, her laptop. One for memories, photos, gifts, anniversary cards. One for the rest, things without value but carrying the shape of her presence. Hairpins, perfume bottles, old receipts. I labeled each box with black marker and left them by the wall. It wasn't rage guiding me, it was precision. Each act felt like closing a tab, quiet and deliberate. The more I organized, the calmer I became. It wasn't the calm of acceptance. It was the calm of someone who had stopped bleeding. In the afternoon, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The house was silent, almost museum-like. I noticed how much space absence occupies. Her shoes were missing from the doorway, her mug gone from the drying rack. Even her laughter, once scattered around these rooms, had evaporated. What remained was air, clean, light, survivable. I went upstairs and opened the closet again. Inside, her scent lingered faintly. I took down her dresses, one by one, folded them neatly, and placed them in the box marked Essentials. I found the red dress she'd worn on our last anniversary. Ironic, given what anniversaries mean now. I held it for a moment, remembering that evening. The candlelight, the way she had looked at me then. Still present, still reachable. That memory stung, not because it was painful, but because it belonged to someone else. By evening, the boxes were ready. I stacked them near the door, alongside a printed envelope of documents. Statements, agreements, her personal files copied to a flash drive. I wanted her transition out of this house to be clean, logistical, unambiguous. At dinner, I couldn't eat. I sat there, staring at the untouched plate. The strange thing about betrayal is how domestic it becomes once accepted. You start noticing textures, the scrape of a fork, the hum of lights, the faint smell of detergent, and each one feels like the outline of what used to be home. That night, I didn't wait for her. I went to bed early, leaving the lights dimmed. She came in around midnight, quietly again. I heard the soft sound of her heels being taken off. The faint clink of jewelry dropped onto the dresser. She didn't speak. I pretended to sleep. Her phone vibrated twice before she silenced it. Then the bed shifted as she climbed in. The warmth of her body didn't reach me. At dawn, I woke before her. She was still asleep, one arm across the pillow, peaceful in a way that almost felt cruel. I got dressed, went downstairs, and brewed coffee. The sound of the machine filled the room like white noise. I packed a small duffel bag, documents, laptop, chargers, keys. I left the mug she liked most beside a folded note. It wasn't an explanation, just a simple acknowledgement. Everything has been arranged. Then I left the house, locking the door quietly behind me. I drove without direction at first, letting the highway take me. The horizon felt wider than it had in years. Somewhere between the exits, I realized how calm my hands were. For the first time, my body wasn't bracing for disappointment. I stopped at a gas station, bought a bottle of water, and stood by the car as the wind picked up. The day smelled like rain again. I checked my phone. The tracker still showed the last known signal of her purse, now near her office. The dot blinked steadily, as if mocking me. I deleted the app. There was no need for surveillance anymore. When I returned home later that afternoon, everything was as I'd left it. The boxes still lined the wall. The note remained untouched. She hadn't come back yet. I walked through the rooms once more, making sure nothing personal of mine was left vulnerable. No files, no open drawers, no loose papers. Every detail had to be precise. It was strange, realizing that revenge didn't feel fiery or loud. Felt like order, quiet reordering of what was once chaos. She would come home and find everything meticulously categorized. The life she had broken, packed neatly into pieces. There would be no shouting, no explanations, no desperate questions. Only the sound of her own silence. When I turned off the lights that evening, I felt lighter. Not free yet, but close. What came next wouldn't be destruction. It would be construction. The rebuilding of myself from the rubble she never noticed she left behind. The day after I packed her life into boxes, I drove back to her office. It wasn't jealousy that sent me there, it was confirmation. I wanted to see with my own eyes what I already knew in my bones. By then, emotion had drained out of me entirely. What replaced it was observation, a kind of detached curiosity, as if I were studying a subject rather than a person I once loved. The city was wrapped in a thin fog that morning. The streets shimmered with early light, and the buildings mirrored it in dull streaks of silver. I parked across from her office tower and waited. The entrance was glass from floor to ceiling, revealing the constant movement of people. Suits, briefcases, polished shoes, lives in motion. I stayed there for nearly an hour, watching without purpose, until the doors opened and she appeared. Emma walked out laughing, her phone in one hand, her bag in the other. Beside her was Daniel, the same man from the restaurant, the one whose hand I had seen on her knee. They didn't notice me. Their rhythm was easy, familiar, unguarded. He held her umbrella as if it were a natural reflex, his body angled toward hers, like gravity itself was pulling them closer. She smiled at him in that unrestrained way people smile only when they feel safe. That was my moment of clarity. Not when I first suspected, not when I saw them in the restaurant, but here in the daylight, in the openness of the world. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had already crossed the line so completely that returning would have meant pretending twice over. I didn't take a picture. I didn't need one. The image was already carved into my memory. Her posture, his expression, the exact tilt of her head as she looked at him. Proof wasn't the goal anymore. Understanding was, and I understood everything. I started the car but didn't drive away immediately. For a few minutes, I simply sat there, watching the building's mirrored surface. It reflected the street, the people, even the spot where I was parked. My own reflection stared back, motionless, faceless in the blur of glass. I realized that for years, I had built my life around her stability, her routines, her ambition. Everything I'd done had orbited her world. Now, stripped of that illusion, I felt something new, clarity without pain. It wasn't freedom yet. Freedom requires acceptance, and I wasn't there. But clarity was the beginning of strategy. When I drove home, the city seemed quieter, as if tuned to a lower frequency. I parked, went inside, and made tea instead of coffee. The ritual felt cleaner, less frantic. Then I sat down with a notebook and wrote a single line. Don't react. Rebuild. That became my mantra. Over the next few days, I moved through life with precision. I went to work, completed every task, and returned home to a house that now felt like an empty museum of shared memories. The boxes were still there by the door. She hadn't touched them or mentioned them, though she'd been home briefly. She had texted me about a few things she needed to grab, but I didn't respond. Silence had become my only language. On Wednesday, she sent a longer message. Calm, carefully phrased. We need to talk. I think we both deserve closure. I read it twice and left it unanswered. Closure, I thought, is just another name for negotiation, and I had nothing left to negotiate. That evening, I deleted our shared cloud drives, our old photos, the anniversary videos she loved showing to friends. I archived everything onto a single encrypted flash drive and sealed it in an envelope labeled, for later. Then I erased every trace of her from my phone. No contacts, no threads, no history. Digital silence became physical clarity. The next morning, she came home unannounced. I heard the front door open, her heels clicking across the floor. She called my name once, softly, as if unsure how to sound casual. I didn't answer. She walked into the living room and froze at the sight of the boxes. I could hear her breathing shift. Then, slowly, she opened one. Clothes folded neatly, her perfume bottles lined in a row, even her jewelry cases organized by color. There was no anger in her silence, only disbelief. I stood by the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. She finally turned, eyes searching my face for reaction. I offered none. Whatever explanation she had prepared vanished. She closed the box, nodded slightly, and left without another word. When the door shut, I sat down and felt something strange. Relief, not triumph. Revenge wasn't going to be a spectacle. It was going to be gradual, deliberate, invisible. I didn't want to destroy her life in one strike. I wanted her to feel it slip away piece by piece. The comfort, the control, the certainty she had taken for granted. I began making arrangements quietly. I transferred my savings to a new account under the company's name, redirecting all income streams to it. I spoke with my lawyer about restructuring ownership of the property, everything legally sound, entirely defensible. I removed her as a beneficiary on the insurance policies. One by one, I dismantled the framework of her security. Each action was a small incision, painless on the surface but deep beneath. She wouldn't notice immediately. That was the point. She'd discover the consequences slowly. First confusion, then realization, then regret. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt haunted. I slept better, though not peacefully. More like a soldier between battles. Every morning, I looked at the sunrise through the window and thought about how silence could be *p*nized. It doesn't scream. It echoes. The next time I saw Emma was 2 days later, outside the same office. She was standing alone, talking on her phone. Her smile was gone. The man wasn't there. I watched from a distance, unseen. There was no satisfaction in it, only a strange calm. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt balanced. The scales had started to tip back toward me. I met with Tom, Emma's father, and my former business partner. No arguments, no accusations, only proof. Records, photos, transfers. He understood, guilt etched into his face. Quietly, he helped me secure funds to rebuild. I launched North Line, a firm grounded in integrity, everything our marriage lacked. Betrayal became currency. I turned loss into foundation. Emma's apologies arrived too late. I'd moved near a lake, my silence intact. Then came Lily, her sister. Honest, calm, unbroken. I realized peace isn't revenge. It's rebirth.